The stars were quiet, their shimmering lights casting a calm glow over the galaxy. For years, the Zorath and Drakor had fought bitterly, tearing apart planets and leaving their once proud civilizations in ruins. It seemed like there was no end to the war, no chance for peace. But after countless battles and immeasurable losses, the leaders of both sides had finally agreed to a fragile truce. The fighting had stopped, or so they thought. The Zorath, a proud species known for their advanced technology and strategic minds, were trying to rebuild their shattered empire. After the war, the planet Zoretha, once bustling with life, was now a shadow of what it had been. The people moved in quiet haste, reconstructing their cities, salvaging what was left, and praying the peace would last. Yet in the back of their minds, they all wondered if the Drakor would break the truce, if the war would ever truly end. It was on one such quiet evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon of Zoretha, that the first sign of trouble arrived. Lone ship appeared in the sky. It was unlike any ship the Zorath had seen before. Sleek and simple, it glided effortlessly through the atmosphere, cutting through the air like a knife. It didn't carry the markings of the Zorath or the Drakor. It wasn't like any ship the Zorath had ever seen. At first they thought it was an enemy ship, a Drakor vessel trying to sneak past their defenses. But the ship did not come from the Drakor homeworld. It was not from any known galaxy. As the ship descended toward the planet's surface, it emitted a soft hum, and its lights flickered, casting a gentle glow on the ruins below. The Zorath military scrambled into action, preparing for the worst. Soldiers ran to their stations, and commanders issued orders through their comm systems. On the ground, the people of Zoretha stopped what they were doing and stared up at the ship in confusion. What was it? Who was inside? Was it a sign of war or peace? The ship landed on an open field outside the capital city, near the remnants of an old fortress. The engines whirred to a stop and the hatch slowly opened. A figure emerged. He was a human. Captain Marcus Ford stepped down from the ship, looking around with a quiet determination. The Zorath soldiers, who had been on high alert, hesitated. A human? What was a human doing here? Humans had never been involved in the war. Earth was a distant, forgotten world that the Zorath had hardly considered. Yet here was one human soldier, alone, standing in front of them. Ford's uniform was simple but well made. His face was calm, his eyes steady. His presence, despite being one man among thousands of Zorath soldiers, held a certain weight, an air of confidence, of authority. He seemed to carry something more than just a weapon. There was an unspoken power about him, a feeling that this man could change the fate of the galaxy. A Zorath commander, General Tharok, stepped forward cautiously. His deep voice echoed through the comm system, and the Zorath soldiers waited for his instructions. "Who are you, human?" he called out, his voice full of suspicion. Captain Ford stood tall, his gaze unwavering. "Captain Marcus Ford, United Earth Military," he said in perfect Zorath, the language of the galaxy's dominant powers. "I come in peace." The Zorath were silent. The general's sharp eyes narrowed. The human spoke their language fluently. That alone was enough to raise questions. How did this human learn the language? What did he want? "You are alone?" General Tharok asked. "You come without an army?" Ford nodded. "I come alone. I was sent to assist." "Assist? Assist with what?" Tharok's voice grew more suspicious. "We have made a peace. The war is over." "Not all wars are fought with weapons," Ford replied simply. He paused, studying the general for a moment. "I was sent to help rebuild, to help guide your people into a new age." The Zorath commander didn't trust the human. How could he? The war had just ended, and now a human, uninvited, had appeared on their doorstep speaking of rebuilding and peace. But there was something in Ford's voice, something calm yet unshakable, that made Tharok pause. It was as if this human knew more than anyone else. He wasn't just some stray soldier. He was something else, something powerful. Ford continued, "The peace is fragile. There are forces at work in the galaxy who don't want it, and I'm here to make sure that doesn't happen, to help protect what you've built." For the first time, Tharok felt doubt. Could this human be trusted? Could he be the ally they needed? The general's mind raced. There were rumors, of course. Stories of humans. Stories of their resilience, their ability to fight and survive against impossible odds. But no one had ever seen them in action. No one had ever truly understood what humans were capable of. "Your presence here is unexpected," Tharok said after a long pause. "But you are welcome, for now." Ford nodded. "Thank you." As the Zorath soldiers began to lower their weapons and stand down, Ford scanned the surroundings, taking in the devastation of the planet. He could see the exhaustion in the eyes of the Zorath soldiers, the weariness in their posture. They had been through a war unlike anything humanity had ever experienced, and now they were trying to pick up the pieces. They were trying to rebuild what had been lost. Ford understood that feeling all too well. He had seen it on Earth. His people had fought their own battles, some won, some lost, and they had always rebuilt. It was in their blood. It was who they were. But as he stood there on the planet's surface, Ford knew something the Zorath didn't. The war was far from over. And this galaxy, this fragile piece, was about to face a new threat. The Zorath thought they were safe. They thought the war was over. But then came the human. The next few days on Zoritha were filled with whispers. Everywhere Captain Marcus Ford went, the Zorath watched him with a mix of awe and suspicion. He had arrived alone, with no backup, no fleet. The Zorath had never seen anything like it. Human soldier, here on their planet, offering to help rebuild the peace. The thought was absurd, but then again, everything about this human was different. Ford had spent the first few days speaking with the Zorath leaders, sharing his knowledge of war tactics, rebuilding strategies, and peacekeeping efforts. He didn't speak much of Earth, nor did he share much about himself. He was focused entirely on the task at hand. His approach was simple, yet effective. He didn't ask for much, only that the Zorath allow him to assist in their recovery efforts. And despite their doubts, they began to listen. Rumors began to spread throughout Zoritha. The Zorath had always prided themselves on their advanced knowledge and superior tactics, but Ford was unlike any soldier they had ever met. It was said that humans were capable of surviving the harshest conditions, of fighting through seemingly impossible odds. They had never known defeat. One evening, as Ford sat alone in a small Zorath council hall, General Tharok approached him. The tall, armored Zorath stood in the doorway, his face unreadable. Ford looked up from the maps and reports in front of him, nodding politely. "Captain Ford?" Tharok said, his voice heavy with curiosity. "I have heard many stories of humans, of their wars and battles, but until now, I did not believe them." Ford put down the datapad he had been studying and met Tharok's gaze. "What have you heard?" "Stories of human soldiers who fought against impossible enemies. One story speaks of a human soldier who fought an entire alien army on his own and survived. Another story speaks of humans who never surrendered, no matter how hopeless the situation." Tharok paused, as though unsure whether to continue. "Some say that humans are relentless, unstoppable." Ford smiled slightly, though there was no joy in it. "Relentless is one way to put it. Humans don't give up easily. Even when everything seems lost, they keep going. It's not about strength or power, it's about will. That's what makes us different." Tharok regarded Ford carefully, sensing something in the human's words. He wasn't boasting, nor was he exaggerating. Ford's confidence came from somewhere deeper, something that went beyond mere survival. It was a strength of spirit. "I understand," Tharok said. "But the stories, they are not just tales. I see it in you. There is something different about you." Ford didn't reply at first. He stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the ruined city below. "Humans are survivors, but we're not just survivors, we're builders. We don't just destroy, We rebuild. After the worst happens, we pick up the pieces and start over. You speak of rebuilding, Tharok said, his tone softer now. But I wonder, do you understand the cost of rebuilding? How much it takes to truly heal from war? Ford turned to face the general, his expression serious. I do understand. On Earth, we've had our wars, our conflicts. Sometimes we lose everything, but we never stop trying to rebuild. We never stop fighting for a better future. Tharok stared at Ford for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Perhaps you can teach us how to rebuild, how to move forward. Ford smiled, though it was a small smile as if to acknowledge the general's cautious acceptance. It's not about teaching, it's about working together. No one can rebuild alone. But if we work together, there's nothing we can't fix. The conversation left Tharok with a lot to think about. He had always believed that strength came from military power, from technology, from the might of their armies. But now Ford's words echoed in his mind. It's not about strength, it's about will. As the days passed, Ford became a fixture in the Zorath leadership meetings. He offered advice on organizing supply chains, rebuilding infrastructure, and ensuring that the peace they had fought so hard to achieve would last. The Zorath were beginning to see him not just as a foreign soldier, but as an ally, a partner, in their recovery. But while the Zorath began to trust Ford, their curiosity about him only grew. Who was this human? Why was he here alone? And how could he have possibly survived the horrors of war without being shattered by them? One evening, as Ford walked through the hallways of a Zorath command center, a young Zorath officer named Lyra approached him. She had been listening to the stories, watching him from a distance, and couldn't hold back her questions any longer. Captain Ford, she said hesitantly, you've told us about Earth, about your wars and battles, but what I don't understand is how are you so unbroken? The wars you fought, they were much worse than ours. How is it that you still have hope? Ford turned to look at her, his expression thoughtful. Hope, he repeated. Hope is something you carry with you, Lyra. It's not something you find at the end of a war or in the middle of a battlefield. Hope is the belief that there's something better ahead, even when it seems impossible. We fight because we believe in that better future. We fight because we know it's worth it. Lyra looked down at the floor, her eyes troubled. But what if there's nothing left to rebuild? What if there's no hope left? Ford stepped closer to her, his voice steady. If you think there's no hope, then there's nothing to fight for. But if you believe there's still something worth saving, then you fight. That's what we do. That's what humans do. We never stop fighting for what's right. Lyra met his eyes and saw the unwavering conviction in them. There was no doubt in Ford's voice, no hesitation. He truly believed in the power of hope, in the power of people working together to create something better. In the days that followed, the Zorath began to view Ford not as just a soldier, but as something more, a symbol of humanity's ability to endure, to rebuild, and to inspire others to do the same. And though the war was over, a new battle was beginning. A battle not of weapons, but of spirit. And Ford, the human soldier who had arrived in their midst, would be the one to lead them toward that future. The days that followed Captain Marcus Ford's arrival on Zoretha were marked by an unusual calm. The Zorath had never before been so willing to listen to someone outside their own species. Ford's presence had become a topic of endless debate among the leaders. Some were still wary of his motives, but others were starting to see the value in his ideas. His guidance on rebuilding their cities and infrastructure was already proving helpful. Ford didn't offer grand speeches or promises. Instead, he quietly worked alongside the Zorath, showing them practical solutions and reminding them that the war wasn't the end. It was simply the beginning of a new chapter. As Ford continued to work with the Zorath, the tension that had once defined the war began to fade. The peaceful talks between the Zorath and the Dracor were starting to take hold. At least that's what the Zorath had hoped. But in the quiet of their military command center, an unexpected message arrived. a message that would soon stir the galaxy back into turmoil. General Thurok sat in his private office reviewing reports of the ongoing peace negotiations. He was pleased with the progress, but the message that arrived was anything but reassuring. The Dracor, long known for their unpredictability, had violated the terms of the ceasefire. They had made an attack on a small border colony of Zorath, sending a message that their intent to remain at peace was nothing more than a facade. Thurok leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. The fragile peace was crumbling, and he knew it wouldn't take much for the entire galaxy to be thrown back into war. The Zorath military was still weakened from the previous conflict, and they were far from ready for another large-scale battle. With the Dracor once again flexing their muscles, it was clear that peace would not come easily. Without thinking, Thurok reached for his communicator and pressed a button. "Captain Ford," he said, his voice steady but tinged with concern. "Please come to the command center. We have a situation." Ford had been in the midst of a strategy session with some of the Zorath engineers, discussing ways to improve communication systems across the planet. He had grown used to the rhythm of his days on Zoretha, quiet, purposeful, yet always on the edge of something deeper. When the call from Thurok came, he knew something was wrong. He quickly excused himself and made his way to the command center. The large room was buzzing with activity when Ford entered. Several officers were gathered around a holographic display, showing the latest intelligence. General Thurok turned to him, his face grave. "The Dracor have broken the ceasefire," Thurok said, his tone sharp. "They attacked one of our colonies." Ford's eyes narrowed as he looked at the display. "What are we doing about it?" "We're preparing a counterattack," Thurok replied. "But we're not ready. Not yet." Ford crossed his arms, studying the situation. It was clear the Zorath were caught off guard. The peace they had fought so hard to establish was already unraveling. But Ford knew something the Zorath didn't. This wasn't just a military issue. It was a test of something deeper. "We can't fight this the way we fought before," Ford said quietly. "You're thinking of the Dracor as enemies, to be crushed. But that's what got you into this mess in the first place. The galaxy is tired of war. What we need now is something they've never seen. A true show of strength, but one that doesn't rely on violence." Thurok looked at him with disbelief. "Strength without violence? What are you suggesting?" Ford met the general's eyes. "I'm suggesting that we stand strong together, not as enemies, but as equals. If we retaliate the way we've always done, we'll just prove that nothing's changed. But if we show the Dracor that we are united, human, Zorath, and Dracor, then we'll send a message they can't ignore." For a moment, the room was silent. The idea was radical even to the Zorath. The thought of not immediately retaliating, of showing restraint, was foreign to them. Their whole culture was based on strength, on military power, and Ford was asking them to walk away from that. But he was also asking them to think beyond the fight, to consider a future where the war didn't define them. "I know it's not easy," Ford continued, "but it's the only way we can prevent another war. I didn't come here to tell you how to fight. I came here to help you find a better way to survive. Let's use this moment to prove we're different." Thurok hesitated. For a long time, he had seen the galaxy as a place where power was everything. The Zorath had always prided themselves on their strength, but Ford was offering something that challenged everything he had ever known. Could it work? Could showing restraint, showing unity, really be the answer? "I'll take it to the council," Thurok said finally, his voice quieter than before. "But I can't promise they'll agree." Ford nodded. "I understand. But think about this. The Dracor only respect strength because they've never seen anything else. If we show them something they don't expect, peace, unity, cooperation, that will speak louder than any weapon." The next few hours were tense. The Zorath Council convened in a private meeting with Ford at their side. The debate was fierce as expected. Some of the council members were eager to respond to the Dracor's attack with force, while others agreed with Ford's proposal, believing that showing restraint might be the key to lasting peace. It was a turning point. For the first time, The Zorath began to truly listen to the human soldier, the outsider who had arrived with nothing but words and a will to change the future. His ideas, though radical, were beginning to take root. Slowly, the council began to move toward a decision, one that would shape the galaxy's future for years to come. That night, the Zorath sent a message to the Drakor. It was not a declaration of war, but a call for peace, a message offering to meet, to negotiate, and to discuss the future of the galaxy, not as enemies but as equals. It was a gamble, one that could either bring the galaxy closer to peace or plunge it back into chaos. Ford didn't know what would happen next, but as he stood in the command center, looking out at the stars, he felt a glimmer of hope. For the first time since his arrival, he truly believed that this was the right choice. The war might have been over, but the real battle for peace was just beginning. The Zorath Council had made their decision. After hours of debate, the message to the Drakor had been sent, a call for peace. It was a bold move, one that sent ripples across the galaxy. The Zorath military, still wary of the Drakor's intentions, were unsure if this approach would work. But Ford believed it was the only chance they had. For the first time in the history of this galaxy, they were choosing diplomacy over destruction. As the days passed, the tension grew. The Drakor had not responded. The silence was deafening. Some believed the Drakor were preparing for another attack, while others wondered if they had underestimated the human influence. Ford knew that this was a critical moment. The Zorath had done something unprecedented, and if the Drakor didn't respond, there would be no going back. General Tharok had spent the last few days quietly observing the humans' influence on the Zorath soldiers. He had seen Ford speak to groups of them, offering advice, encouragement, and wisdom. The human soldier was different from anyone Tharok had ever met. He wasn't just a warrior. Ford was a leader, someone who inspired others to think beyond the battlefield, to consider a future that was free from endless war. But Tharok knew that the real test was yet to come. The Drakor had always been unpredictable, and they had never been ones to back down from a challenge. The message they had sent would either be a beacon of hope or a call for retaliation. Tharok was nervous, but Ford remained calm. The day the Drakor finally responded, the entire command center went quiet. The message had come in on a secure channel, fast, direct, and sharp. General Tharok activated the holographic display, and the room filled with the image of a Drakor warlord. Standing tall and imposing, his eyes were cold, filled with years of hatred and aggression. "You Zorath are fools," the Drakor warlord said, his voice heavy with contempt. "You think peace is possible after everything we've done? We will never bend the knee to you, or to any human. Prepare for war." The message was blunt, filled with malice. The Drakor were not interested in peace. They wanted power, and they were willing to destroy anything that stood in their way. It was a declaration of war, not a negotiation. The room fell silent. The Zorath soldiers exchanged uneasy glances. This was the moment they had feared. The Drakor had made it clear that they were not willing to listen. They had rejected diplomacy in favor of destruction. The fragile peace that the Zorath had hoped for seemed impossible now. But Ford didn't flinch. He stood at the back of the room, arms crossed, his face calm. He had expected this. The Drakor were never going to make it easy. He knew this would not be a battle of weapons alone. This was a battle for hearts and minds. General Tharok looked at Ford, unsure of what to do next. The Drakor had made their intentions clear, and war seemed inevitable. But Ford didn't share his concern. He stepped forward, his voice steady. "This isn't over," Ford said. "This is just one response. They want to fight, but we're not going to give them the war they're expecting. We're going to show them that we're not afraid to stand our ground, not with weapons, but with our resolve." Tharok looked at him in disbelief. "You want to confront the Drakor with words? They will not listen. They are too far gone." Ford shook his head. "It's not about what they'll listen to. It's about what we're willing to do. The Drakor are strong, but they're not invincible. Their power lies in their ability to make others fear them. But if we stand together, human, Zorath, and even Drakor who want peace, Then we will be stronger than they are. We can show them that war isn't the only path forward. Tharok stared at Ford, his eyes searching for any hint of doubt, but there was none. Ford believed every word he said. We need to rally the galaxy, Ford continued. We need to reach out to every species, every planet that's tired of war. The Dracor can't win if we stand united. The Zorath general still wasn't sure. How can we unite a galaxy that has been torn apart by war for centuries? How do we stop the Dracor from destroying everything? Ford's eyes burned with determination. By showing them that we're not afraid to fight for what's right. We fight for peace not out of weakness but out of strength. If we stand strong together, they will see that their reign of fear is over. It's time to show them that we have a better way. Tharok nodded slowly, the weight of the decision settling on his shoulders. You believe in this, don't you? I do, Ford said, his voice resolute. The days following the Dracor's message were tense. The Zorath military prepared for the worst, but Ford's words echoed in their minds. There was no going back now. They had made their choice. Now they had to show the galaxy that peace was still possible. Ford and Tharok worked tirelessly, reaching out to other planets, other species that had suffered under the weight of the war. They called for unity, for cooperation, and for a future where the galaxy could be rebuilt. Not through destruction, but through understanding and shared goals. The response was slow at first, but as more and more leaders from different worlds joined the cause, the message grew stronger. The galaxy had never seen anything like it. A united front, not of military power, but of hope. The Dracor had made their move, but the galaxy was standing up to them in a way they never expected. The warlords could destroy cities, but they couldn't destroy the will of a united people. And then, one morning, a message came through. The Dracor warlord, the one who had declared war on the Zorath, sent a new message, a message of defeat. The warlord's tone was no longer confident or threatening. It was filled with uncertainty. You Zorath, you humans, you've shown us something we didn't think possible, the warlord said. Perhaps we were wrong. Perhaps there is a different path. The warlord's words were not the declaration of victory the galaxy had expected. It was an invitation to a new kind of peace. Ford looked at the message, then turned to General Tharok. He didn't say anything, but there was a look in his eyes that said everything. They had won, not with weapons, but with resolve. The Dracor had finally realized something important. Strength wasn't just about power. It was about the ability to choose a better way. The galaxy, once filled with chaos and war, had begun to shift. The message of peace sent by the Zorath and human alliance had sparked something powerful. Though the Dracor had initially rejected the offer, they were now on the defensive. The growing alliance of species, human, Zorath, and others, was showing strength, unity, and a vision for a future that didn't rely on war. The galaxy's people were beginning to see the possibility of something new, something better, but not everyone shared the same vision. As the days passed, strange things began to happen. Rumors of unrest within the Zorath ranks spread, whispers of those who weren't happy with the shift toward peace. There were still many who believed in the old ways, the ways of dominance, military strength, and fear. General Tharok had done his best to silence these voices, but he could feel the tension growing beneath the surface. Not all of his people had embraced the idea of cooperation. Ford had noticed it too. The tension among the Zorath was palpable, but it wasn't just the Zorath he was concerned about. He had learned that there were whispers within the Dracor as well, dissenters who didn't want peace, who wanted nothing but war. The Dracor warlords, with their brutal ways, had always thrived on violence. Now, there were factions within, their ranks hidden from the public eye, plotting for a return to the battlefield. Ford knew that they couldn't rely on words alone to keep the peace. There were forces at play, forces that didn't want to see this fragile alliance succeed. Late one evening, as Ford walked through the hallways of the Zorath Command Center, his communicator buzzed. He answered it quickly. "Captain Ford," came Tharok's voice, tense and urgent. You need to come to the council room, we have a situation. Ford's stomach sank. He had known something like this was coming. He hurried to the command center, his mind racing. What now? When he arrived, Tharok and several of his senior officers were already gathered. The mood in the room was grim. What's happened? Ford asked, his eyes scanning the room. We've received intelligence, Tharok said, his voice quiet but firm. There's a faction within the Zorath military that doesn't want peace. They've been secretly undermining the efforts we've made with the Dracor. They've been sabotaging our operations, spreading lies and working behind our backs to ensure the war continues. Ford's eyes widened. Sabotage? Tharok nodded. They've been leaking false information to the Dracor, convincing them that we are weakening, that our peace efforts are a trick to lower their guard, and we've discovered evidence that this faction has been secretly arming their own forces. They're preparing for a war, not peace. Ford felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He had suspected that not everyone was on board with the peace effort, but this was worse than he had feared. The idea of a hidden enemy within their ranks working against them from the inside was a danger that could unravel everything they had worked for. How many are involved? Ford asked, his voice steady despite the shock he felt. We're still gathering information, Tharok replied. But we know it's not just a few rogue soldiers. This faction is deep-rooted within our military structure, and they're willing to do anything to keep the war alive. Ford frowned. This wasn't just a matter of diplomacy or military strategy anymore. This was a threat to the very foundation of the peace they were trying to build. If this faction went unchecked, it could destroy everything they had worked for. We can't allow this to continue, Ford said, his voice firm. We have to act quickly. We can't let this faction spread their lies any further, or we'll lose everything. Tharok nodded. I agree, but we can't just eliminate them with force. If we act too quickly, it will make things worse. The other Zorath will see us as no better than the Dracor. We need to find a way to expose them without resorting to violence. Ford thought for a moment, the gears in his mind turning. This was the delicate balance he had been talking about from the beginning. They couldn't just fight fire with fire. They needed a solution that would expose the truth, rally the galaxy behind them, and make the hidden enemy's efforts irrelevant. I have an idea, Ford said slowly. But it's risky. We need to get to the heart of this faction, find out who's leading it, and expose them for what they are. We can't let them control the narrative. Tharok looked at him with concern. What do you suggest? We need to use their own tactics against them, Ford said, his voice low, but filled with determination. We'll leak the truth about the faction, their plans, their betrayal, and let the people see it for themselves. We can't fight them in the shadows. We'll bring their actions into the light, and once the truth is out, the Zorath people will turn against them. Tharok hesitated, clearly torn. Exposing them like this, it could cause unrest. It could create chaos within our ranks. It will cause chaos, Ford replied, but the kind of chaos that will unite the people against this faction. Will show the galaxy that the real enemy is not the Dracor, but those within our own ranks who want to drag us back into war. There was a long silence as Tharok considered Ford's plan. It wasn't perfect, but it was their best option. If they didn't act, the hidden faction could continue to destroy their efforts in secret. If they exposed them, they might lose the support of some, but they would gain the trust of many others. It was a gamble, but it was the only way forward. All right, Tharok said finally, his voice resolute. We'll do it, but we need to be careful. If we make a mistake, it could be disastrous. Ford nodded. I know, but we don't have much time. We need to move fast. The plan was set in motion. In the following days, the truth began to seep into the public eye. Leaked information about the faction's activities spread like wildfire. The Zorath soldiers, once loyal to their leaders, began to question their allegiance. They saw the betrayal for what it was, the last remnants of an old mindset that thrived on fear and violence. When the truth was revealed, it shattered the hidden faction's grip. The Zorath people, horrified by the treachery of their own, turned their support toward the peace efforts. The galaxy stood at the brink of something new. The forces of war had been exposed, and the light of unity was finally shining through. The galaxy was holding its breath. In the days following the exposure of the Zorath faction's betrayal, the fragile peace that had been carefully constructed between the Zorath, humans, and Dracor began to crack. Ford had known that the truth would not come without its consequences. But even he hadn't anticipated how deeply the ripples would spread. The Zorath military, once united under a banner of war and strength, was now divided. The revelation of the faction's secret efforts to sabotage peace had shattered the trust that many had placed in their leaders. Some Zorath soldiers, still loyal to the old ways, felt betrayed by the shift in direction. Others, seeing the depth of the corruption, began to question everything they had ever fought for. The Dracor, on the other hand, had remained silent since the initial message. The warlord who had rejected peace in favor of violence had not made a public statement since the revelation of the Zorath faction's betrayal. Ford knew that this silence was a sign. The Dracor were watching, waiting to see how the Zorath would react, waiting to see if the peace would hold. Captain Ford had spent the past few days meeting with leaders across the galaxy, trying to reassure them that peace was still possible. The Dracor might have rejected peace once, but they were not all of the Dracor. There were factions within their ranks that might still be convinced to join the cause. Ford wasn't ready to give up. He couldn't be. The stakes were too high. The tension on Zoretha was unbearable. It felt as though the slightest spark could set everything ablaze again. Ford was in constant meetings with General Tharok, strategizing, their next steps trying to maintain some form of order within the chaos. One afternoon, as Ford walked through the halls of the command center, Tharok found him and pulled him aside. "Captain Ford," Tharok said in a low voice, his tone serious, "we've received another message from the Dracor." Ford's heart sank. The Dracor's silence had lasted too long, and now it seemed like they were finally making their move. "What did they say?" "They're ready to talk," Tharok said, his face unreadable. "But only if we meet them in person. They've demanded a face-to-face meeting with our leaders." Ford frowned. "A meeting just like that?" "Yes," Tharok confirmed. "But there's a catch. They want us to come alone. No guards, no backup. Just us." Ford's mind raced. This was a trap. He could feel it. The Dracor had always played by their own rules, and now they wanted to test the Zorath and the humans. They were trying to see if the fragile peace could survive under pressure. "You're not seriously considering going, are you?" Ford asked, his voice cautious. Tharok paused, his eyes narrowing. "I don't like it either, but we don't have many options left. If we refuse the meeting, they'll see it as a sign of weakness. They'll strike again. But if we accept, we might just have a chance to negotiate." Ford's thoughts were clouded. The Dracor had a history of deception. A meeting like this could lead to disaster. But he understood the need for action. Peace was fragile, and sometimes taking a risk was the only way forward. "I'll go," Ford said after a long pause. "But we'll need a plan. We need to be ready for anything." Tharok looked at him, a deep sense of respect in his eyes. "You're sure about this?" Ford nodded. "We can't let fear dictate our actions. If we're going to show the galaxy that we can coexist, we have to be willing to take risks. But we'll need a backup plan. If things go wrong, we can't afford to be caught off guard," Tharok agreed, and together they quickly set a strategy in motion. Ford would attend the meeting, but Zorath Command would monitor the situation closely, prepared to intervene if necessary. They would rely on intelligence, their understanding of the Dracor, and most importantly, Ford's resolve. It was a dangerous gamble, but one that could potentially shift the balance in their favor. The day of the meeting arrived, and Ford was escorted to a neutral space station near the Dracor border. The station was small, isolated, and stark, a ice cube place that felt cold and impersonal. Ford stepped off the transport ship, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the weight of history pressing down on him. This could be the moment that defined the future of the galaxy. The Dracor warlord was already waiting when Ford arrived. The warlord stood tall, his massive form silhouetted against the dark backdrop of space. His cold, calculating eyes locked onto Ford as he approached. "You are brave, human," the warlord said, his voice a low growl. "To come here alone. Most would fear to meet me face to face." Ford stood his ground. "I'm not here to fear you. I'm here to find a way to end this. The galaxy doesn't need another war." The Dracor warlord sneered. "You think the Dracor are weak, do you? That will fall to your words. You've made a mistake." Ford shook his head. "I'm not asking you to surrender. I'm asking you to see the truth. The war is over. It's over because we've all lost too much. You've seen the cost of war just as we have. Don't let it consume you any longer." The warlord remained silent for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he spoke. "Perhaps you're right," the warlord said, his voice filled with a strange sort of hesitation. "Perhaps we've both made mistakes." Ford's heart raced. The conversation wasn't over, but it was moving in the right direction. The warlord's words were a crack in the armor of the Dracor's fear and pride. Ford pressed forward. "We have a chance," Ford said, his voice steady. "But only if we choose to take it. The galaxy is watching. If we show them that we can work together, that we can build something better, then maybe, just maybe, we can start to heal." The warlord's eyes softened ever so slightly. "And if we cannot, if my people do not agree?" Ford smiled faintly. "Then we'll deal with that together. But we won't give up. Not this time." The warlord was quiet for a long time, and Ford wondered if he had made a mistake. But then, the warlord finally spoke again. "Perhaps the time for endless fighting is over," he said, his voice quieter now. "Perhaps it is time for something new." Ford nodded. "Exactly. A new beginning. For all of us." As the meeting concluded, Ford felt the weight of the moment settling in. This was the chance they had been waiting for, the opportunity to turn the tide of the galaxy's future. The war had never truly been over. But now, for the first time in a long time, there was hope, and hope was something worth fighting for.